Graceland, 1969. Elvis Presley is sitting in a private screening room with a few close friends, watching the rough cut of his latest film. 30 minutes in, he suddenly stops the film. The room falls silent. Elvis stands up, walks toward the door, and says the words that shock everyone, "I can't do this." Then he leaves. His friends rush after him and find him upstairs in his bedroom, crying, not quiet tears, deep, broken sobs. What Elvis said that night would completely change the course of his career. "For 10 years I've been making the same terrible films, and I know I can do better. I know it, but nobody lets me. Nobody gives me the chance." For 10 years, Elvis Presley had been condemned to make formulaic, forgettable films, films that wasted his potential. That 1969 screening was a breaking point. The moment he realized he had been sacrificing his artistic soul to Colonel Parker's paychecks, and the moment he decided to say never again. 6 months later, Elvis returned to live performance with the '68 comeback special and the Vegas residency that would define the final years of his career. But it all started with a film he couldn't finish watching. If you went to the movies in the 1960s, you saw Elvis Presley films, many times over. Between 1960 and 1969, Elvis made 27 films, nearly 3 a year, and they all followed the same formula. Elvis played a charismatic young man, a race car driver, a boxer, a pilot, a singer. He meets a beautiful girl. At first they don't get along. He sings 5 or 6 songs. A misunderstanding happens. They fall in love. The end. 90 minutes. Done. The films made money. A lot of money. Young girls bought tickets. Families went to see them. And Elvis's manager, Colonel Tom Parker, loved it. The films were predictable income. 3 films a year, soundtrack albums for each one, commercial deals. Elvis was a product, and the assembly line was running efficiently. But there was a problem. The films were shallow and unsatisfying. Not just mediocre, actively bad. Lazy scripts. Forgettable songs. No artistic ambition whatsoever. Elvis knew it. The critics knew it. And by the late 1960s, audiences were starting to lose interest too. Box office numbers were falling. Of course, Elvis hadn't always made bad films. His early work, like Jailhouse Rock and King Creole, showed real potential. Elvis could act. He had screen presence. Directors and co-stars praised his talent. But after Elvis returned from the Army in 1960, Colonel Parker steered him away from serious roles and toward formula films. Why? Because it was safe, low risk, high profit. Parker had no interest in Elvis's artistic development. He was interested in money. Elvis tried to push back at first. He asked for better scripts. He wanted to work with serious directors. He dreamed of making a Western, a drama, something with substance. Parker's answer was always the same. Stick with what works. Fans want to see you singing and smiling, don't complicate it. And Elvis, trusting Parker, obedient by nature, accepted. Year after year, film after film. The same formula, over and over again. But by 1969, something had changed. Elvis was 34 years old. The music world had moved on. The Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Bob Dylan. Rock music had taken on a serious, political, artistic dimension. And Elvis? He was still making beach party films. He felt irrelevant. He felt embarrassed. And he felt trapped. The film Elvis was watching that night at Graceland was Change of Habit, his 31st and final narrative film. It was slightly different from his usual formula. Elvis played a doctor working at an inner-city clinic, and his love interest was a nun, played by Mary Tyler Moore. But it was still formulaic, still shallow, still a waste of his talent. Elvis had invited a small group to the screening: Joe Esposito, road manager; Charlie Hodge, guitarist and close friend; Red West and Sonny West, bodyguards and childhood friends, and a few others from the Memphis Mafia. They gathered in Elvis's private screening room at Graceland, a small room Elvis had built in the late 1960s so he wouldn't have to go to public cinemas. Elvis loved films. He watched them obsessively. Classic films, new releases, anything he could get his hands on. But watching his own films? That was different. That was painful. The screening began. Everyone settled in. Elvis took his usual seat. Middle row, center chair. The lights went down. The film started. For the first 20 minutes, Elvis watched in silence. His friends glanced over at him from time to time, trying to gauge his reaction. Elvis's face was expressionless. No emotion at all. Then came a musical number. Elvis's character, the doctor, was singing to children at the clinic. The song was forgettable, something written specifically for the film, stripped of any real emotional weight. On screen, Elvis was smiling and dancing and hitting his marks. In the screening room, the real Elvis stared at the screen, his jaw tightening. Another scene. Another formulaic exchange. Another song that sounded like every other song in every other Elvis film. Joe Esposito later recalled, "You could feel the tension in the room. Elvis wasn't laughing. He wasn't reacting. He was just watching himself waste his own talent." About 30 minutes in, during another musical number, Elvis stood up. "Stop the film." Charlie Hodge, operating the projector, froze. "What? Turn it off. I can't watch this anymore." The film stopped. The lights came on. Elvis didn't look at anyone. He walked out of the screening room, down the hallway, and up the stairs. His friends sat there in stunned silence. Should they follow him? Should they give him space? After a few minutes, Red West stood up. "Let me go check on him." The others followed. They found Elvis in his bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands, and he was crying. Not quiet crying. Deep, body-shaking sobs. The kind of crying that comes from years of suppressed frustration, finally breaking free. Red West had known Elvis since high school and had never seen him like this. "Elvis, man, are you okay?" Elvis looked up. His face was flushed, tears streaming down. "No, I'm not okay. I haven't been okay for 10 years. He stood up and started pacing. "Do you know what it's like to look at yourself on screen and feel nothing but shame? To know you're capable of so much more, but be condemned to make the same garbage over and over again?" The men didn't know what to say. Elvis kept going. "I've been making the same film since 1960. Different titles, different costumes, same stupid story, same forgettable songs. And I did it because Parker said so, because the studio wanted it, because it was easy money." Elvis's voice broke. "But I'm better than this. I know I am. I could have been a real actor. I could have done serious work. This is embarrassing." Charlie Hodge tried to calm him down. "Elvis, the films make money. The fans love them." Elvis shook his head. "The fans deserve better. I deserve better. And it's over." "What's over?" It's over. These films are over. I'm not making another one. No matter what Parker says, no matter what the studio wants, I'm not spending another year of my life on this." Joe Esposito, ever the practical one, asked, "So what are you going to do?" Elvis stopped pacing. He looked at Joe with a clarity that hadn't been there before. "What I should have been doing all along. Performing. Real performing. Not this scripted, fake assembly line nonsense. Real music, real audiences, real connection." He sat back down on the bed. "I need to get back on stage. That's where I belong. Where I can actually do what I came into this world to do, not standing in front of a camera making films nobody's going to remember." Red West later described that moment as watching someone wake up from a 10-year sleep. Elvis had been content just to exist for so long. But that night something broke, and something else, something real, came back. Elvis wiped his eyes, stood up, and made the decision that would define the rest of his career. Call Parker. Tell him I want to do a TV special, live performance, real music, and then I want to go back to performing live. Vegas, touring, whatever. But I'm done with the films. Done." The next morning, Elvis called Colonel Tom Parker and told him he was finished making films. Parker tried to argue. The contracts were lucrative. The studios were willing to keep going. Why walk away from guaranteed money? Elvis's answer was simple: because I'm dying inside, and I'd rather be alive and broke than dead and rich. When Parker realized he couldn't change Elvis's mind, he shifted course. "All right, but if we're done with films, we need another revenue stream. Television? Live performance?" Elvis agreed to both. 6 months after that screening at Graceland, Elvis filmed a 1-hour NBC television special that aired in December 1968, the '68 Comeback Special. It was the opposite of everything the films had been. Raw, live, electric, real. Elvis wore black leather. He sat in an intimate setting with a small group of musicians. He performed his classic hits, That's All Right, Heartbreak Hotel, Hound Dog, with an energy and passion that had been missing from his work for years. The special was a massive success. More than 40% of American viewers tuned in. Critics called it the best thing Elvis had done in a decade. And Elvis, watching the broadcast at Graceland, finally felt proud of his work. Building on the success of the Comeback Special, Elvis returned to live performance in July 1969 with a residency at the International Hotel in Las Vegas. It was his first live concert in 8 years. Opening night was electric. Elvis was nervous. He had been away from live performance for so long. But the moment he walked on stage, something clicked into place. The audience went wild, and Elvis felt a vitality he hadn't felt since the 1950s. The Vegas shows became legendary. Elvis performed 2 shows a night with a full orchestra. He wore custom jumpsuits. He moved, he joked with the audience, he gave everything he had to every performance. It wasn't perfect. The schedule was brutal. The pills were accumulating. But it was real. And for Elvis, that meant more than anything else. After Change of Habit, Elvis never made another narrative film. Offers came. Scripts arrived. But Elvis turned them all down. In a 1972 interview, a reporter asked Elvis whether he missed making films. His answer was clear: no. I spent 10 years of my life making films I was ashamed to put my name on. I'm not spending another minute on that. He made 2 concert documentaries, Elvis, That's the Way It Is, and Elvis on Tour, which captured his live performances, those he was proud of. That 1969 private screening was a turning point. Elvis saw himself on screen, hated what he saw, and made a choice that saved his career, even if it couldn't save his life. Because while the Vegas years brought artistic fulfillment, they also brought exhaustion, addiction, and ultimately Elvis's death in 1977. Looking back, Elvis's film years 1960 to 1969 represent one of the greatest wastes of talent in entertainment history. Elvis Presley, at the height of his fame, had been trapped inside a factory system producing mediocre films because his manager prioritized profit over art. What could Elvis have achieved if he'd had the freedom to pursue serious roles? What might have happened if he had worked with great directors? If he'd had the courage to say no earlier? We'll never know. And that is the tragedy. But that 1969 screening at Graceland was the moment Elvis woke up. The moment he realized that success without fulfillment is just a slow death. The moment he chose artistic integrity over easy money. And the result was the '68 Comeback Special and the Vegas years, performances that reminded the world why Elvis had been the king in the first place. The men who were there that night, Joe Esposito, Charlie Hodge, Red and Sonny West, all spoke about it over the years in interviews. Joe Esposito said, "That night changed Elvis. He had been sleepwalking through his career for too long, but watching himself on that screen and seeing what had become of him, something broke inside. And then he woke up." Charlie Hodge recalled, "Elvis cried in a way I had never seen before. But when he stopped crying, there was a determination there, like he had finally decided to take control of his own life. Red West put it most simply. Elvis walked away from the films that night, and he became Elvis again. If you remember Elvis Presley, you probably remember the jumpsuits, the Vegas shows, the concerts. You might not remember the films, and that is intentional, because Elvis didn't want to be remembered for them. But the films taught Elvis something important, that success isn't enough. That doing what others want, even if it makes money, will eventually hollow you out from the inside. And when Elvis finally realized that, sitting in that screening room, watching himself waste his talent, he made the hardest decision a successful person can make. He walked away. Elvis Presley died 8 years after that screening. On August 16, 1977, at Graceland, surrounded by the same friends who had been with him that night in 1969 when he wept. In those 8 years, Elvis gave hundreds of concerts. He gave everything he had. And while the touring schedule and the pills would ultimately destroy his health, at least he was doing what he loved. The films? He never watched them again. He didn't need to, because he had already seen enough to understand that he was worth more. And once you understand that, you can't go back to not knowing. That 1969 screening broke Elvis. But it also set him free. And in the final years of his life, Elvis Presley was not just a product. He was a performer. The king. And that is how he wanted to be remembered.